Good late afternoon, everybody. I think while this is not an official meeting of our board, and I can't look for a quorum, I know we don't have one, but I think we're going to get started anyway because it's about time. I'm John Sherman. I'm chair of our Regional Solid Waste Board here in Davidson County. Really quickly, I just want to point out who the board members who are here. Leslie Alexander sitting in the back. Guy Patterson right here, Jack Venata, Mr. Robert Deal, Beth Reardon, thank you all for coming. I'm sorry we don't have everybody here. The last meeting, as those of you who were in attendance know, it was incredibly informative for at least me and I think others. And we're going to follow on that performance with two other speakers tonight who promised that that the first meeting was just a warm up. This is the real show, isn't that right, Will? And I'll just again for those of you who weren't here last time, the intention of these meetings is really is for the board and for the public, and we're hoping the city council members. They're noticeable by their absence, to really start thinking about our solid waste in a bigger way and get informed about what's happening globally, what's happening in the United States. And tonight we're going to hear what's happening in the Southeast, both from a recycling perspective and then within Tennessee from a regulatory and whatever else Mr. Cressy is going to talk about perspective. So how we're going to run it is both the two speakers will talk for about 15 or 20 minutes. Sharon's going to hand out cards for you to write down questions on. She'll organize them, and then I will work with the two speakers for a Q&A session for as long as we need to be here, but no longer than than 7:30. But I assume we may be out quicker than that. We were last time. Anyway, with that, let me first introduce Will. I think you're I think you're up first. You are. Will is the executive director of the Southeast Recycling Development Council. We're delighted that we could actually get him to piggyback on another meeting. It's their annual meeting that's happening about a block away at the DoubleTree. And he is going to speak to us about recycling possibilities, the future as well as the present here in the Southeast. I think probably the most important thing about Will, there's probably three things. One, he's a Tar Heel fan. So if any of you are Vol fans, you may want to have a conversation with him. Secondly, actually, if you ever hiked in the Smoky Mountains, one of the peaks there is named after one of his family members. And third, I don't know what the third one was, but I think we're going to have to stick with those two. And Mr. Sager, please.
Good evening. You never know what you're going to say when they say, well, I really don't want to read this bio. But you take what you get. And John, that was very nice. It is my pleasure to be here in the volunteer state. And I'm not just a Tar Heel fan now. I have a pedigree. I spent my time there, wrote my checks. They gave me my certificate when I finished. And then both my children benefited from their education there, though my daughter has gotten her master's here in this fine city and remains here after graduating, works here, loves it, and I know Leslie knows her because her child's at that same school. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. I'll tell you just a little bit about CERDIC. I guess the most obvious thing is who funds CERDIC. CERDIC is made up of several members. We have some members coming from government, but most of our members are on the industrial side, and these are the sponsor members. They're the ones paying more than just our membership dues, but sponsoring our activities. And the first rule of journalism is to follow the money. Well, this is who funds us. This is my slide for transparency, so that you can understand where we're coming from. CERDIC has completed some work for the state of Tennessee. We released a characterization of Tennessee's economy in February of this year. I'm going to speak to that some. We're going to have a much more in-depth look at that study in our symposium that I will mention that's coming up. Starts with a reception tomorrow evening, programming on Thursday and Friday. So you've got the opportunity to really look much deeper, and we'll have speakers representing many of the industries in Tennessee and some national speakers coming in as well. But our perspective on recycling is this is how we're feeding economic growth. I'm not here to give you an environmental message. There are plenty of people that will do that. They're all or some of them may be more solid than others or sound. Our message is that recycling indeed creates jobs. When we invest in our recycling program, we're feeding businesses, manufacturing jobs in Tennessee and across the region. When we look at recycling, there's lots of players. We as the consumers are finished with our packaging or our paper materials, and they've got to go somewhere. Much of our collection is performed by or under contract with our municipalities, and they're that leg. Then it's going to go to a material recovery facility to be separated, put in trailer load quantities, and at that point, the manufacturing sector is going to get it, some of it through intermediate processing, but on to manufacturing, and ultimately then it's going to be back on the store shelf again and continue that cycle. And along the way, there's a value to the material each and every time it changes hands. Now, when the consumer's getting rid of it, maybe the consumer is even paying to have our spent material. We pay to get rid of our trash, and sometimes we pay to get rid of our recycling. That's because that material we no longer want. It has a negative value. But from that point on, the material, every time it changes hands, something's been done to it. It's been separated, modified, processed, or manufactured. It increases in value all the way around the cycle, and there are jobs at every one of those stations. CERTIC completed a study a couple of years ago to look at the impact the manufacturing sector is having across the region. The Southeast is home to many of the manufacturers that consume recycling that's generated all across the country. We've got, we are all right-to-work states in the Southeast. We've got low utility rates, thanks to TVA and Southern Power Company. It's very attractive to bring manufacturing into the Southeast, and our government's put some very attractive incentive packages there. We've done well, particularly, I think you highlight what's happened in the automotive industry in South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and even some in North Carolina. We're seeing lots of industry come here for several reasons, and many of them consuming very large quantities of recycled material. But at the same time, our recycling rates, our participation to feed those in our region lags behind much of the country. In our study, we looked at those facilities that are reliant wholly or in most part on the type of material that's coming out of a typical curbside, out of the bin that we're putting at the curb. We identified 206 manufacturers. This isn't everybody that's using recycling. This isn't everybody around that value chain. This is just the manufacturing sector, and it's those that we identified that truly are fully utilizing recycling. There's some that we didn't find. There are others that are partial users. There's many more, but we can document this sampling employing 47,500 people and putting right at $30 billion a year back into our economy across this region. To give a little more detail and look at the breakdown is where we are, we are asked frequently, how does my state rate? Well, I don't know that this is a rating mechanism, but in terms of number of manufacturing jobs depending on recycling, Tennessee's third, behind Alabama and Georgia. And we take these three contiguous states are the top three. There's right here in this, where all the rain comes up out of the Gulf of Mexico, I guess, is providing what we need for manufacturing. But manufacturing is strong in this district. We've put this information into an online tool. This is just a basic Google map that everybody's familiar with. We've identified all 206 of these facilities. You can click on one. The information will pop up as to material type, the name of the facility, how many employees, what their sales are, what their feedstock is, what products they're making, and a link to their website if you need to know more. This isn't so much a tool for us in the industry. This is a tool so that I can zoom in then on, let's say, a congressional district or a state representative district. And you can see in an area where are the constituents working in and around that region and drive this home. So that this interactive tool has proven to be a valuable tool for us. Looking at Tennessee, we're under contract with the state of Tennessee, specifically TDEC. We completed a characterization of Tennessee's recycling economy. We released this in February this year. I've got copies here for the board members. You can download the entire copy. There's a link to that on our homepage, serdc.org, serdc.org. I'll have a slide at the end with that information in it. We looked in this characterization, we looked at what material is collected in Tennessee through reporting that is gathered by TDEC through their online tool that they work with. We looked at what is missing by taking a waste characterization, a study of how much material is in a ton of garbage. A basic sample of garbage will have so many pounds of plastic, so many pounds of paper, and so forth. We took that and overlaid that then to Tennessee's demographics and looked at how much material is lost in Tennessee. Then we looked at the demand for the material, and not across the entire state, but we drilled in just on 3 plants that consume more than is collected in the entire state, and I will speak to them specifically. And then further, we looked at a model, how can we get the material from here to there? And we're going to roll out that specific hub and spoke system that's recommended in that characterization in the symposium that's coming up August 15th and 16th, which is the day after tomorrow and following. We also had a workshop series across Tennessee last year where we went over some best management practices. The manufacturers identified in Tennessee that are on the demand map, the Google map I showed earlier, we've drilled in here in this slide. It is part of the characterization report, but just looking at the specific companies that needed material in Tennessee. And these are those 30 companies. We've got within the report there's more looking around Tennessee because in the region there's a lot of consumption of material. We looked at some of the municipalities across Tennessee. We didn't pick any for being good, bad, model, needing improvement, but we just looked at 3 types. And specifically, since we are here in Nashville, we did use Nashville to look at an urban program with curbside and drop-off collection intertwined. We looked also at some suburban programs with curbside, some with just drop-off, and we looked at some rural programs. All of that's in the report. But looking here specifically at Nashville, you've put 140,000 carts to homes. Is that, and we've got this right? That's a huge, I mean, we're talking, this is $7-8 million worth of investment. That is a huge investment to take you forward, but we're seeing probably no more single effective way to improve household capture of material than that cart conversion. It's clearly a step in the right direction, and at the same time, the city's operating some drop-off centers around. You're reporting the reports that we've got turning in the state, and this was fiscal 12, I think, of 20,000 tons collected through the program. If we look back at our demographics and how much in our waste characterization we would lay, there's still another 110,000 tons of material that's lost that should be in these bins here. That's a big loss. If we just had half of that, and I look at work done by the College of Charleston for the state of South Carolina for every 1,000 tons of recycling that we interject into our programs, that's another 1.68 jobs. If I do that for 55,000 tons, that's 94 jobs right there. If a factory was going to come in and open up and employ 90 to 100 people, it would be on the front page of the Tennessean. It would be that kind of an impact. We want these jobs, and there's that many jobs lost, or there's a lost opportunity for those jobs in that lost 100,000 tons of material a year. We need that material right here in Tennessee. Alcoa, huge employer in East Tennessee, 1,500 employees out there. They could handle 175,000 tons of feedstock a year. The entire state of Tennessee is capturing 2,570 tons. It's a huge shortfall. They're having to buy it from other places. Indeed, they're buying it from the entire country. They're buying it from overseas. That's money that's spent, that's generated in Tennessee, and it's leaving Tennessee to put the feedstock back into Tennessee. Rock 10, the plant in Newport. OCC is what we call for old corrugated cardboard, but this is all of our cardboard made or out of craft paper. They need 146,000 tons. The entire state of Tennessee and all the municipal and county programs reporting into TDEC collecting less than half of that. They're buying the other half of it, but they're buying it from the Carolinas, they're buying it from Georgia, they're buying it from Kentucky, Ohio. Again, that's money that's leaving the state. VIAM and VICAM, their division where they've expanded down in Manchester, making OEM automotive carpet. They're going to go through right at 5,500 tons of PET, plastic bottles, they are soda bottles. They're going to go through 5,500 tons a year. The entire state's collecting 3,800 tons. Larry's done some work just looking at the counties that adjoin Coffee County. Did I get that right? That's what you bring a Tar Heel across the Smokies. It gets a little geographically confused. But just the counties that are contiguous about there could collect enough to feed that plant if we look at what they're consuming and what's lost. But we've got to have the change in what we're doing to feed that. There's a lot more information about these companies in here, and that is in the report. But to get back, just kind of look at what our life cycle is. Our material starting out at the curb, it's going through our our material recovery facilities, our MRFs, and ultimately into our manufacturing sector. And along the way, there's some jobs created on the front end. It does take some jobs to get them collected, but when we start putting into the MRFs, into our intermediate processors, we're creating even more jobs, and ultimately in the manufacturing sector where we have the largest impact. We've got to deal with the economics along the way, though, because the material, right when it's all commingled and collected, it doesn't have a very high value. And we've got a range of how much municipalities are receiving when they take that to the material recovery facility. They may be getting paid some on an index, or in some cases they may even be charged for what they're leaving there, when indeed there is value to the material. But it has a lot to do with what the local competition is and where their contracting is. And I'll say that many times municipalities are not the best negotiator in contracts. Municipalities and local government, they're mission driven, they're not bottom line driven. And that we need to look at how we contract and address spreading that across there. Looking, Sharon had asked that I look at some other cities. I looked at some of the cities within my region, but EPA shared some information with me that went much broader and looked at the number of pounds collected at many cities across the country, all the way to San Jose, California. And none of us like to hear about how great things are in California, but they are doing a good job with their recycling. How did they get there? This chart really looks at the cities at the bottom with 500 pounds and more, their capture rates. They're all in 90-gallon carts, and the top two, Austin and San Jose, are in pay-as-you-throw. We've got to get away from flat-rate waste collection. We don't have flat-rate utility prices for electricity. We don't have flat-rate utility prices for water. We even pay by how much data goes through our phones. Why is garbage all you can eat? This is not the Golden Corral. It's a hard political sell, but it can be done, and everywhere it is done, it does better. What steps to take? If I was to take where we looked at the breakdown of Nashville and Nashville Metro, once a month collection really isn't frequent enough. I think you're going to find. I don't know how the citizens remember that it's recycling day if it comes once a month. I wouldn't. But then there's somebody in my house that tells me on Friday to get up and maybe I should put the bins out, and it says, "Why don't you ever even do that? You just talk about it." You do need to look at you have made the conversion to carts, and for every time we talk to a municipal program, conversion to carts is one of the bullets, but you've done that, you've been there, and I applaud you, because that was a huge investment. Do you have RFID on these carts? Whoops. And that's a very good question. Radio frequency identification. It's a chip that when they at manufacture, they put in there, it adds $1 to the cart. Now, at 140,000 carts, that's $140,000, and somewhere along the line, the people said, well, you maybe aren't even going to be reading it, or what do you want to know that for? We've got a presentation on Friday morning where somebody's talking about just what you really can do with the information. For one, you can have the chip in the cart if you never put the reader on the truck. And in Alabama and North Carolina, if your grant program is to fund carts, they will have RFID in it, whether or not the reader's on the truck. You can always put the reader on the truck later. What this does, it's a little chip that just emits a tiny little radio frequency thing, and they're good for 15 years, I don't know, they're good for years and years, that they last without having to be serviced. When the truck goes to pick that can up or roll it up to the back of that can, there's a reader on that truck that puts it to a hard drive. This is the time of day. This is can number, serial number such and such, which your home computer's got tied back to that house address. So you know when it was picked up. You'll know what's your frequency. You'll know what their you'll get a true participation rate for every single household. You can map this out and see it. You can overlay it on your routes for your trucks. You can improve routing. You can handle a lot of your customer complaints. If I put my cart out and the guy didn't pick it up, and you can say, well, when did you put it out? 10. We'll say, well, you know, the truck went by at 9:40 because here's the documentation. And that'll go a long way. And this, Ray Romano, not Ray Romano, what's his first name? Tony Romano, thank you. I would be nowhere if I didn't have Elizabeth to keep me straight. Tony Romano with Sunray, they make these chips. He can talk about, you can figure out what drivers are working harder, what routes do indeed take longer for each pickup, or what driver's just not performing as well, or what driver is spending an hour that's unexplained when he pulled the truck into the quick shop and went and talked to his girlfriend. All of that data is there, and that can help you be more efficient, and that'll pay back that $140,000 in a hurry. You can, better information is better management each and every time. Increase outreach. I will always recommend increased outreach because there's no such thing as too much outreach. We should see recycling availability and participation encouragement everywhere we turn because it's going to take that to make the behavior change that we need to get to. I would suggest you look at more disposal restrictions. Your legislature this year started considering a disposal ban, a prohibition on landfilling or incineration of aluminum or plastic beverage containers. There seemed to be support for that. The bill was amended as it went through. This was Senate Bill 941. It was amended to become an incentive rather than a disposal ban, and I think that's a step forward, but it's a very small step forward. Other states have banned lots of materials. You're already banning liquids. You're already banning automotive batteries. The automotive battery industry has built its own infrastructure and responded through the years, and they collect 97% of every battery out there. We can start looking at other things. North Carolina did pass a plastic bottle disposal ban, and they passed the bill in 2005. It had a 4-year window before it became effective, so people could gear up and get ready. And during that time, the capture for those materials for plastic bottles doubled in North Carolina. They went from a 13% capture rate to a 27% capture rate in 4 years. It had a significant impact, and it really didn't burden anybody. We're still losing a lot of plastic bottles in North Carolina. It's not perfect, but disposal restrictions do help. Required participation. What if we just said you have to have a recycling plan in your business? Again, North Carolina, the 2005 legislature was very pro-recycling. We had champions in both chambers, and some things moved forward, and one was that every bar or restaurant that has a license for on-premise consumption will submit a recycling plan with their annual license application. There's an exemption for hardship if you really don't have access to recycling for your company or your restaurant, or if you got some significant space considerations. We are now, we're 5 years into that, and nobody is asking for an exemption. Every bar and restaurant has a plan. Some of them perform better than others. But we've seen glass capture in North Carolina increase by 38,000 tons a year, and we've seen a private collection industry arise with 16 new companies out providing jobs and providing the service to that industry. If you provide the motivation and the impetus, the private sector does respond. I would go so far that we shouldn't just look at bars and restaurants. Why doesn't every business have a recycling plan? Every business is getting rid of whatever waste material it has. I mean, if I'm just an insurance office and I've got some papers going out, there's no reason we can't have that going into a recycling program. Why doesn't even one city could just say, that's just part of business license application. What are you going to do with your waste products? Write it down. It could be very simple. That's enough of my preaching on that one. Our website's got some resources that for certain type of things you'll find helpful, I hope. We've got economic reports that we've done. We've got economic reports that have been done in separate states where we've put them together. We've got the links to all the different states' offices and the resources they have. Many of them have done a wonderful job. The Recycle Guys, have you ever seen some of you may have seen the Recycle Guys, little cartoon characters spelling out recycle. They all come from DHEC in South Carolina. They created this. They've got the talent in that staff to come up with ideas like that, and they've put them out there, and they're free for you to use. You can get there that way. Market directories, waste exchanges, and then our publications. I encourage you to participate and learn more. In the 15 minutes that we have here, I cannot go through the 40 pages that we've got in that report, but we will do that starting 8:30 Thursday morning. I think that's right. Anyway, ask Elizabeth because she's the one that really knows what's going on. But we do have, we've got speakers coming from D.C., many from here in Tennessee, Alabama, and others. I do encourage you to come participate in that. There's my contact information. We're going to do questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. That was a very informative, and I don't know if we're going to take a vote on like if you've just swept them off their feet from the last meeting or not, but we won't do that. But it was that.
I won't be compared to John Skinner in any fashion.
What I appreciate that I mean you grounded us a lot more on kind of what's happening in the Southeast and some real possibilities, and that was very helpful. And for those of you who just came in late, we're going to do Q&A through index cards. There's a pile on the back. Please write them down. Also, I was bemoaning the fact that we didn't have any city council representatives here, and we have one now. Councilwoman Berkey-On, thank you for coming. She is she's not only from my district, but she's known for many things. But one of them is she's probably planted more trees in Davidson County than anybody I know. So, plus she likes recycling. So thank you for that. We're going to turn now, and we get to hear from our state agency and all that they're doing, and we no doubt we'll have plenty of questions. But Larry Chrisley's here from TDEC. He manages the planning and financial assistance section. He's the one that basically tells Sharon what she's supposed to do every year, and the one that all of our reports go through and all the information. So Larry, I know you can get up and tell us a little bit about what's happening here, what's coming in the future, and perhaps reflect on other states as well. So thank you.
Okay, again, my name is Larry Chrisley. I work with TDEC. My particular section is the Planning and Financial Assistance sections. Basically what that section is basically we take the solid waste planning for local governments and the financial piece when it comes to the grants and rebates. And my job is to try to coordinate those efforts, trying to fund the planning and help local governments move the mark as it relates to waste reduction and diversion opportunities. So kind of title this the state of Tennessee, and state meaning kind of where we are. The first part is going to be the facts and the figures. I'm kind of a numbers cruncher kind of person. My section that does planning, the local governments submit their numbers to them along with other parts of the annual progress report. We take those numbers, we review them, and then we crunch them, and then generally I go around and talk about them a lot. So this is one of the talk about them a lot parts of the job there. We're first going to talk about materials managed, where we are, and then ultimately where we are going. So let's start with the materials management in Tennessee. Just to get started, just to make sure we're all talking the same thing, what is generation? Generation is basically all the municipal solid waste that we produce as individuals, as companies, commercial establishments, institutions, all that material solid, municipal solid waste. We also have construction and demolition waste that is created through construction and demolishing buildings, land clearing waste, all that might go to what we call a Class 3 landfill, which is a construction and demolition landfill. And we take recycling and then all other diversion activities. This could be source reduction. This could be sending materials for other beneficial use where the materials never go to the landfill. It could be taking that product and reusing it as some other product, use it as part of road base maybe, or directing it to some other function. Basically anything that keeps it out of a Class 1 landfill, which is a municipal solid waste landfill. When you add all these things together, we have what we call generation. And in Tennessee, we have a statewide, as reported by the local governments, a statewide generation of about 10.6 million tons of material. Again, probably about half that is disposal. The other half has to do with the generation of recyclables and take that material and use it for other purposes. Just to kind of give you an eye, everybody wants to know where we are. So I took the top 10 generators of municipal solid waste in the state of Tennessee. I have those on the left side. Generally, these kind of correlate with population to a large degree, but not always. And then I took their disposal and put it on the right side. So you can see somewhere between about 50 to 60% of what they're generating falls into the disposal category. You can see how Davidson County has about 1.2 million tons of generation, and what they're disposing as reported is about 645,000 tons. So that's right at a 50% or close to a 50% mark when it comes to disposal versus the other diversion. Look at the other side of the coin. The 10 lowest generators, generally, again, population plays a part of this. When you only have about 2,000 people in your county, it's awful hard to generate 1 million tons of waste. So those numbers are going to tend to be smaller. As a state, we dispose approximately about 0.79 tons per person in municipal solid waste. That's really not taking the commercial waste into play there. That's just strictly what we generate from a residential sector. When you look at their disposal, notice that the disposal is closer to what they're generating. So as you get down the list with the smaller generators, disposal plays a larger and larger part of what they are generating. It's harder to recycle, harder to move that material. Just for some numbers' sake, again, my section is real good at crunching numbers, so I tend to have a lot of numbers for you. As reported by the local governments in their annual progress report in Tennessee, when we look at total disposal, this is what goes in the Class 1 municipal solid waste landfills, and in construction and demolition landfills, we have almost 7 million tons of material. Municipal solid waste, we're hitting about 5.6 million tons. In the Class 3, 4, or the construction demolition, about 1.5. That means basically, and that's in line with what other states are doing. We have the same Walmarts, we have the same Home Depots, we have the same office buildings and all the other different components. When you look at the big picture, we have the same amount what they have in Georgia, and that is helpful because when Georgia did their waste characterization study, we were able to use that their study, their expensive study, and use it to determine what's going on in Tennessee. TSU did a study just to make sure that what we're doing in Tennessee is similar, and that study found out that it was similar. So we used the Georgia numbers pretty closely to try to find out what is actually happening out there. Average disposal costs, this is what across the state, what's reported at the gate. So if you drive up with a truck to a landfill in the state of Tennessee, the average cost for tipping that material is about $38.71 per ton. We get this number from one of our many reports where landfills report to us what they charge for the disposal of waste at that landfill. Basically, if you take the number of tons in Class 1 and multiply it out, we are paying about $217 million to dispose materials. I didn't say waste, I said materials, because that material has some value. And we'll look down below and see what kind of value that has. A missed opportunity, if we take a very conservative amount as far as value for those materials at $100 a ton, that's a good average figure. I've talked with several people in the industry. When you figure glass is low, maybe $5 a ton, and you got aluminum at $1,400 a ton, when you take a good average, $100 a ton is a very conservative amount when you look at all the different materials that are there. So we are basically putting in the landfill $420 million worth of material that has value. So we're pushing up towards $500 million of material into a landfill. We want to pay $217 million to put $420 million in there. It's like I gave you a check for $420 million, and you take that check, you go out in the backyard, you pay someone $217 million to dig a hole, put that check in there and bury it up, and we never come back to it. That's essentially what we're doing on a yearly basis. If you want to put another value to that, kind of the next ripple out, when we look at jobs, according to that College of Charleston study that Will was talking about just a little bit ago, 1.68 jobs for every 1,000 tons. We put a value of over 7,000 potential jobs across Tennessee that we're writing out the "you are employed" papers, and we're burying it in the ground and covering it over forever and ever. So essentially that's kind of what we're doing. When we look at the potential revenue that local governments can get through tax revenues, this could be taxes on businesses that are using the material, the taxes from the people who are employed, the property taxes, the missed revenue value that comes in. You figure about $3,160 per 1,000 tons. Essentially, we're taking another $13 million in check, and we want to bury it alongside because those other checks are lonely. And we want to make sure that those checks have company. So we take another $13 million in potential revenue that local governments could use towards building their infrastructure, paying for schools, taking that tax burden down, because everybody knows taxes go up, they don't go down. So we want to take this and put it into the ground and bury that opportunity. And then another thing that we're also losing is all that personal income, those jobs. Once they create those jobs, those people get paid. And those people go to the Burger Kings and support the Burger Kings. They support other businesses. And the revenue that is lost from that is there's about $77,000 for every 1,000 tons. So that third ripple out that we're missing out in is another $323 million that we are missing out on, all because we're burying material in the ground. Is that just a little bit, or is that a lot? I think we could employ 1 or 2 people for that. In fact, I think all our, a lot of those jobs are pretty well-paying jobs. If you look kind of across the board in recycling jobs, you're looking at about $40,000 to $45,000 a position average. Those are kind of high-paid manufacturing jobs. Those aren't low-end jobs, and we're missing out on that. So, the key is we're paying $217 million while we're missing out on pushing towards $1 billion just in the state of Tennessee. A lot of potential there. If we only do about half that, we still pay $100 million, but look at all the other economic benefit that we could have. I know that statistics and numbers are just that. We can look at them and they're just numbers, but until we actually start doing something with those numbers and using them to act as a speedometer and point us in the right direction, it's just numbers. I can put these numbers up here and tomorrow we'll forget about them and we won't ever use them again. But the key is if you see these numbers and you see the potential there, you can take this and you can use it to move the ball forward. Now let's look at recycling. I guess I'll put the white hat on, kind of what we're doing here in Tennessee. Reported by local governments, we had total tons of recycling, about 2.3 million tons. This is not what we're doing from a residential standpoint necessarily. This is all recycling. It would also kind of include the C&D recycling. This is where they take boards or materials out of the construction demolition and they use those for other things that they're making. And we take the value of those recyclables. Let's look at applying the same principles that we previously saw under disposal, kind of what we're doing, how it kind of affects Tennessee's economy. Estimated dollar value, again, $100 a ton. You're looking at over $229 million of potential revenue. This may not go back to local government. Some of this may go to the material recovery facilities that are getting the material, or it may go to the next processing. But when you look at the $100 a ton, when you're collecting, that's about a good average of what's going on. 1.68 jobs. This is not necessarily creating. This is what is sustaining jobs in Tennessee. Almost 4,000 jobs. I wanted to check this. So I pulled up, some time ago, pulled up some resources, and we were hitting right at about, based on just a simple check of numbers, nothing scientific, but it was hitting right at about 4,000 jobs as far as the recycling industry. So this number's pretty close. The College of Charleston did a pretty good job getting in the ballpark on that number. Tax value, you're looking at over $7.2 million that are added into the coffers of local government to operate and continue their programs. Personal income, we're basically $176 million. That's pretty good. And total cost avoided, almost $89 million in cost avoidance because we are now diverting those materials away from the landfill. The costs that don't reflect up here are costs that are long-term care for those, once you entomb those checks into the ground, you want to make sure that you take care of those checks, and you have to continually manage. You have to do monitoring, and there's costs there. There's a lot of costs that aren't reflected in what we're doing here. So if we don't put it in, we don't have to work. We don't have to pay to do those monitoring. We're actually putting them back in the economy. The thing is, like Will said, once it gets to landfill, it's like a period at the end of the sentence. It stops right there. But when you take that material and you put it into the economy and you put it in manufacturing, that material goes around and around the circle. And every time it goes around the circle, it's created revenue. And then it comes to an end of life, and it has a choice of either becoming the period at the end of the sentence or starting another trip around the circle again. And again, paying for those transporters, those truckers that are carrying the material, the manufacturers who are making the products, the people who are providing materials to those manufacturers, or their jobs are being paid for because those manufacturers are manufacturing those jobs. The truckers that are carrying it to the retail stores, and the circle goes on back around again. Each step, there's jobs. Each step, there's revenue that is generated. Based on the reports that came out, these are all the different sectors as reported by local government as far as recycling. Look at residential, you're looking at about 15% of the total recycling across the state is residential. That's kind of low. When you look at commercial and institutional, industrial, and then the combination of commercial and industrial and commercial institutional, you might, if we add the all sectors in at 4%, add that into residential and call it close to 20%, but that's probably overinflated. So the vast majority of what we call recycling in Tennessee is from our leaders in the manufacturing realm. The reason why they do that is because it makes financial sense. And this is where local governments, if they see where business is doing this, they're taking this lead, they're going that way because it makes financial sense, it meets their bottom line, it helps them achieve their bottom line. Why as local governments are we not doing the same thing? So we're only capturing 15% of what we're doing statewide is being reported as residential recycling. The real problem with that is statewide, the average capture rate for individual materials is about 1 to 2%. So of all the plastic that's in the waste stream in the state of Tennessee, on average, we're only capturing 1 or 2%. So we are burying 98% of the soda bottles. We are burying 98% of the aluminum cans. The good thing is we're capturing about 60 to 70% of the cardboard that's out there. The reason why is because it takes up a lot of space on those trucks and it's kind of expensive, so they're diverting cardboard to through other processes and actually making money on it. It also has a easy value and it's easy to pick out. But you look at all the different materials that are out there, they are very low on the capture rate. Diversion, recycling, odds and ends, recycling rate 3%. Capture rate, when we take that study that we talked about with Georgia, that 2 to 3% is kind of where we're hit. I don't have a rate there because it really varies by commodity. When you're looking at, like I said, cardboard, you're looking at close to 60, 70% statewide. But when you're looking at something like an aluminum can that everybody knows is recycling and has the highest value of recycling and is the easiest, most recyclable material that we have, we're looking 3 or 4%. Household hazardous waste diversion, these are your chemicals like cleaning chemicals and stuff like that, your pesticides that you take home and try to kill bugs. We're collecting about 180 tons across the state that we're keeping out of landfills and out of causing problems. And then overall diversion tonnage, which for the most part is a term of C&D disposal. The way the law is written is that if it goes into a class 3-4 landfill, it's not going into class 1 landfill, so it's considered diversion. So it's still going into landfill, but it's not going into municipal solid waste landfill. So that's what that is. Local governments get credit for that. I'll talk about the task force in a little bit, and they were wanting to address that, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. Facilities and programs, just to kind of let you know infrastructure. 34 active class 1 municipal solid waste landfills, 68. Most of those 34 landfills are privately owned. It flip-flops on the class 3-4 landfills. There's 68 facilities. About 70% of those are owned by local governments. Composting operations, there's 12 facilities reported. Material recovery facilities, about 76, and pay-as-you-throw programs. We had 12 that were listed in the annual progress report, and when I looked at them, basically they were calling the tipping fee that you pay when you go to landfill a pay-as-you-throw. That's not a pay-as-you-throw. Pay-as-you-throw is volume pricing at the collection point, primarily like at the residential location. So there's 6 of those. Kind of going down through the different facilities, there's 50 different public bailing facilities. These are what the local governments have, and you just kind of look down through there. There's still a lot of facilities there, which is good. It means we have the infrastructure to recover materials. We have the capacity that if local governments ramped it up, we could ramp up the capacity and improve the capture rate up to about 50 or 60% without a whole lot of extra added costs or as far as infrastructure. 10-year trend when it comes to disposal. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. This is a whole lot easier. Good thing is, as a state, we're trending downward on disposal. Population is steadily moving up. Disposal's trending downwards. Look at diversion. Unfortunately, diversion's heading downwards also. Recycling, generation, it's trending downward. When you take those other pieces and your add them in, and then they're starting to go down, the generation goes down also. So that's kind of how things are going over the last 10 years. Green boxes, they're basically unmanned county waste collection sites. Dumpsters alongside of the road, just to kind of put it bluntly. 11 counties still report having green boxes. That means anybody can dump anything out there in those garbage cans or those dumpsters are out there. There's no monitoring of it, and a lot of them catch on fire. A lot of them aren't tended real well, and so we still have 11 counties. One of them, their entire solid waste system is pretty much based on green boxes. They have 80 or 90 green boxes in that county scattered throughout the county to collect the garbage. here's kind of a graphic picture of where those counties are. So it's still kind of scattered across the state. Talk about the urban drop-off. I think Will went through this slide, so I won't go through it. Basically, where are we going? We had a, let me make sure, proposed waste reduction rule. We have a rule package that we're trying to work to put together. It went to the board recently, and they asked us to kind of adjust it a little bit. They wanted some additional wording in there, but essentially it's broken up to a couple parts. Basically, we're taking the current qualitative assessment procedures, and we're mixing those with the current rules to kind of harmonize what we do when we go out to local governments fail to meet the goal. It looks to require quarterly reports. Originally, it was from Class 1 and Class 3, 4 landfills, but they've asked that Class 3, 4 landfills be an annual report, which we're currently not collecting. So that's going to be updated to an annual report for Class 3, 4 landfills. And material recovery facilities over 100 tons per year. And this way, small businesses would not be put out, but still get the larger amounts of material that's coming in. Also get proprietary status to industry recycling data, and ultimately allow for an extra 30 days extension in submitting the annual progress report to the state in cases where time may be running short and the board has not been able to meet yet. Statewide solid waste plan. We're currently operating under a solid waste plan that is over 23 years old. It was more of a study called the Bark and Bust study, and basically it was adopted as a plan, but it really doesn't talk what to do and in what timetable. So in 23 years, we have not had a plan. So our goal is to try to step forward and try to establish a new plan. This one identified 9 different programs that we should do. Part of that is adopt a 25% waste reduction goal, which we've pretty much been doing for the last 23 years. Institute waste reduction initiatives, and we've been kind of following this over the last 23 years, and we've been successful to a large degree in doing that. We're nowhere near where we could be, though, based on the numbers that we saw earlier in the presentation. In 2007, there was Waste Reduction Task Force. We had 26 professionals representing many sectors from commercial to local governments. 22 identified new directions, 43 identified issues. This was at the first meeting of the Waste Reduction Task Force. We took those different identified new directions and issues, and we broke those up into 4 work groups that fell under waste reduction goal and methodology, public and private participation, government organizational roles, and infrastructure and financial development. Just so you can kind of see some of the things here, I won't go through each of them, but basically one of the things was just simplify the waste reduction goal. I think what the task force recommended was a 20% public recycling goal. Very easy to quantify. So that's kind of, these are kind of things that were looked at that we needed to do. These were not the recommendations. This was at the very first meeting. Basically, let's simplify things. Let's be very direct in what we do. Let's determine what the waste stream is doing and identify the hazardous and toxic waste that may be present. Understand our current infrastructure. Basically, if it goes into the ground and it's disposed, let's call it disposal. Extend a tipping fee surcharge to Class 3, 4 landfills, single stream recycling, make everybody responsible. Basically, cities and counties share responsibility, work together. Initiatives for partnerships and industry, develop strategies first, then infrastructure, conduct situational analysis to account for differences of local government abilities, conduct situational analysis, develop best management practices, address infrastructure needs and shortfalls, identify markets for recycling commodities, basically review previous grants, what's available, what grants have the greatest return on investment. And these are kind of things that we've kind of been doing. We didn't have to go to rule on those kind of things where we're looking at our grants and our rebates. What can we do to make things happen? We made a few administrative changes and getting comments back that, hey, this is good. Our local solid waste boards are now engaged. They're having to engage. They're having to talk about these issues. If we want grants, we're having to engage our boards. We're having to talk to our local governments that are within our region. We're doing more directed grants that help infrastructure like recycling hub and spoke type projects. What didn't work? What's looking at performance. and looking at pilot projects. Currently, we're in the process of trying to put an RFP together. RFP is basically how we select a contractor to look at a new solid waste plan. When the contractor is selected, that contractor will go out, they'll do meetings with the local governments. They'll do 4 meetings across the state on a listening tour, basically what needs to be included in a solid waste plan. They'll do a lot of information gathering. They'll come and they'll write a report. They'll put it together, and they'll go back out to the public again saying, here's what we think based on what you said and what's out there that needs to happen in the state of Tennessee. And they'll take that information as provided and finalize the report and present it to the department. This is kind of a timeline that we're wanting to try to follow. We're a little bit behind on what we've wanted to do. I'm hoping that we will have the RFP out on the street in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I just recently answered the last 5 questions I hope that will come up, and that those will be able to go out for proposals. Integrated solid waste management, when you look at all the different pieces that are out there, you ultimately want all those pieces to kind of work together. If those pieces don't work together, we're not operating right. There's some places where some things will work better. If you're in rural Tennessee where there's nothing but maybe 1 or 2 outlets, maybe 1 or 2 of these wheels, that may be it's all that's available. But if you're in a large city like Nashville, you may have 10 or 12 wheels turning here, and each one of those pieces are important. We don't want to neglect any of them. We want to look at all of them and compare what is the best, most cost-effective way of putting the system together. And now, setting up a statewide plan, what will we do? Ultimately, it'll set a vision. That vision is where we're going to go for the next 10, 15 years. That plan will ultimately establish a framework that local governments will look at. They'll pick and choose the things that are most effective to create that integrated solid waste management system. Look at acceptable practices, what kind of timing we need to do. Identify all the stakeholders that are local. Guide for local governments by providing a regional plan to format. In other words, we'll talk about all disposal in the first part, all recycling in the second part, and so on, and kind of work our way down. Who are the stakeholders? How are we going to implement this? And then ultimately provide resource and reference to those local governments. Plans might include suggestions for goals, milestones, action steps, objectives, timing, stakeholders. It may tell us how to handle infrastructure, future funding projects, grant expenditures, product stewardship, EPR, that's extended producer responsibility, or even voluntary producer responsibility, waste conversion technologies, waste energy. So those are all different things that the plan might include. We'll show this map earlier. These are all the different facilities that are baling, collecting and baling and processing materials for industries across the state. When you put our hub and spokes that we put in place currently, you can see that those hub and spokes pretty much cover a great part of the state, but there's still gaps. But when we look at the larger cities in the state of Tennessee and we add out a 50-mile radius on each of those between the hub and also these larger cities, most of those gaps are filled. And we're able to pull within those 50 miles into those hubs and use economy of scale to keep the cost down and move those materials and process them effectively. So the hub and spokes are one of the things that we're looking at to try to keep the cost down and improve efficiency, and also have local governments working together. Right now we have all these little bitty silo programs that really aren't very effective because all the resources are being expended to do everything. What a hub and spoke does is you have a hub that focuses on processing. That's the vast majority of everything they do, so they can invest all their money into processing. If they're going to invest if it's a spoke, they invest most of their money into collection and getting that material to the hub. By specializing that, you can maximize your dollar amount, keep the cost down, and make it effective. And this can be for anything, not just recyclables. It could be for talking tires. It could be for organics. It can be for same process works. The material management industry has been using this for many, many years. They call them transfer stations. It's the same thing. It's just what we're calling material. So we just look at the economics, higher load value, focused approach on collection and processing, economy of scale. avoiding that duplication of equipment and leverage the resource of each participant, and ultimately transportation savings. So when you put those economy of scale pieces into place, and we sit here and we educate the public, where we're not arguing with them about what this is. I mean, I can take that same plastic bottle that Will had up here. If I put it on the ground, it's litter. If I put it in the garbage can, it's garbage. If I put it in a recycling bin, it's a raw material. What's changed? That bottle has not changed. That bottle is exactly the same. It's the perspective in which we approach that bottle. And when we take that perspective and we focus it towards what our grandparents used to do, 7,500 years ago, we'll make a very cost-effective choice there. We're not diminishing the value of that material. So that's where our goal is. What we're talking here is not, like Will said, not really environmental. It's economic, because that's the language that everybody understands. You talk to commissioners, you talk to mayors, you talk to industry. Everybody understands jobs. Everybody understands revenue. They also understand the red line expenditures. So when you put in that respect, everybody can understand it, and everybody can talk the same language, and hopefully we can move the ball forward. And I think that's all I have.
Great. Thank you,
You're welcome.
Will and Larry, if you could stay up here, I know that Sharon's going to collect questions. And yeah, just come on up, because we are going to be on Channel 3. So you can, if anybody's missed it, we'll make sure that everybody in City Council knows they can tune in. I think it's right next to the school board meetings, if I recall. Two exciting things. While Sharon's collecting, there's lots of questions. I'm not quite sure which one to start with, but why don't we start with the whole thing? Will and Larry, I'm interested in how this will be addressed in the plan. But you mentioned pay as you throw, and we have, as of July 1st, kind of the fully implemented pay as you throw program. You can only put out one garbage can per 95-gallon garbage can per. Is it per collection period, right? So every week? Sharon, is that right? Is it every week for pay as you throw, you can only fill up one 95-gallon garbage can?
Yes.
Okay, so that's weekly. So we have one, but I'm curious about, so what do you see is really working out there with pay as you throw? Kind of what, and I'm really thinking about in the Southeast. So kind of what are the limits? What works well? What doesn't?
Pay as you throw is more effective the smaller the increment size. If your increment size is 95 gallons, your effectiveness of how much it's really going to change behavior is going to be limited. If the choice is for a lesser rate than 95, I could have a 65-gallon card, and for less dollars a month, I could have a 30-gallon card. It would be more effective. If you went another step, and then for every bag of garbage that went into that container, I had to pay, say, $2, that would be much more effective. If you went extreme and actually weighed every time you tipped and recorded it with your RFID, you would have a very, very effective. Your pay as you throw is a step in the right direction, but it could be more effective with a smaller increment size.
Thank you for that. Is there anything that's being talked about within the plan or within the agency, or did the task force address this at all?
Pay as you throw is one mechanism that we have. Basically at TDEC, what we're doing as far as the rules are laying out the parameters that local governments can use, and pay as you throw is definitely one of the strategies that would be acceptable. We currently have, like I said, 6 different programs that identified pay as you throw. We have one that is essentially, if you put it into a tonnage standpoint, is like $220 a ton when you figure out the actual cost. I think it's like $2 a pound or something like that is what the local government's actually charging. But when you look at it, that's a very effective way of driving things. Each one of those plans is what the local government says is the most effective way for that local government to reach the goal. The board looked at that plan. They looked at all the different methods that are included in that plan and basically said, we agree that this is the best way for us to get there. From a state perspective, it's the region's plan. My job is to make sure that it has all the components that are required by law, and that update to that plan is submitted on time. And basically, we look at the numbers that are progress there. So as far as executing the plan, that plan is executed at the local level, and we're just providing oversight just to make sure that it's followed appropriately. So from a standpoint, as far as statewide plan, all it's going to do is define framework and also different acceptable methods. There would be a time that waste energy wouldn't have been an acceptable method. Now it's a key piece of an integrated system.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. I think that's, between those two comments, I think we can see here in Davidson County where we have this page to throw, we can tighten it up quite a bit. Something that you had mentioned, Will, in your talk about that curbside was kind of like the most efficient way to get recyclables from residents. And I'm not sure if I understood that right. But that's what I heard, and I'm just wondering, there's been a conversation here. We have lots of drop-off centers as well for residential. Which one is, I don't know, there's cost effective than, I guess, on a per ton basis for getting the cost, just what's collected more. Was I correct in hearing you saying that curbside was better?
No, I don't know that I put it quite that way.
Okay, yeah, well, correct me.
I do think as we look across the state or region, in a rural community, a convenience center structure is much more efficient. If the houses are a mile apart, it doesn't make sense to go curbside for waste or recycling.
But right here in Davidson County.
If we get somewhere between that extreme and this extreme, there's some fine line where it's more efficient to switch to that. Clearly in Metro Nashville, you're past that efficiency, and it is. There are still benefits to having some collection centers because somebody may have an overrun if they entertain one weekend, particularly. That cart may not hold everything. They may want to do something else. Or you may, as you have elected not to have glass in the curbside, and still provide collection opportunities for that. So I think there's some justification for that. It's probably got more justification if it's with your collection on that once a month is probably where I would look at increasing that if it was feasible. I've got one supporter out there, I know.
Yeah, well, yeah. So Larry, when you're looking at, across the state and look at the different plans and seeing what's really, how different groups are in different regions are measuring what's being recycled. I know there's the report. And, in Davidson County, we've had a hard time with that report about really what does this mean. We know that the commercial numbers are a guess. Sharon does her best to get them, but no one has to report them. What are you seeing that where we can get better numbers? Both, we're thinking we're pretty good on the residential, at least within the urban service district. Is that true on the GSD as well? Yes. Okay. So, but on the commercial side, we're not. What are other, what else is happening in other regions where those numbers may be more accurate, or are they? Or are we doing as best we can, and how can we do better?
I think that from a standpoint of where the best numbers are, local governments do a very good job as far as keeping track of the numbers. They're from the public programs. It's easy to get those numbers. It's easy to report those numbers. You don't have issues that are proprietary business numbers that come into play. A lot of times when you're dealing with commercial establishments, they're going to round, sometimes greatly, sometimes high, sometimes low, basically to try to maybe throw off their competitors, because a competitor knows about how much material it takes to do what they're trying to do. So basically looking from that standpoint, probably the most accurate numbers are the commercial, or not the commercial, but the residential sector numbers, because local governments are managing those. Can we do a better job? That's a good place to go as far as looking at the numbers. The task force said that those were probably the most accurate, and that's why they set the goal on recycling at 20% publicly collected numbers, or the residential numbers. The commercial numbers are good when we get consistent responses. We're not basically getting all the information that's there, but if we're getting consistent numbers from industries that want to showcase what they're doing, they want to appear to be a good steward in the environment, those numbers are pretty good as far as a general direction, but by no means are we capturing a great number of those numbers.
Did you say that the idea about the new plan is perhaps looking at mandating reporting of commercial, and that you could aggregate it, so we wouldn't look at any one particular company, but as a sector? Is that
right? Basically, it was going to one step away from the commercial sector and look at where the materials come together at material processing facilities, and look at what basically comes in and what goes out, and kind of where it came from a source location. So we got a general idea from a county where it came from, and it goes into a processing facility. We know about how much is coming in, so we know how much is going out.
all right? Well, that's there's that whole piece around commercial that feels as if we don't have a really good handle on it yet. And we've talked about having a transfer station here in Davidson County, where at least if we have everything come there, then we have some control over it, right? We don't have that right now, and hopefully sometime we can talk about that. But where's Sharon? I know she rolls her eyes anyway. So Will, and you've mentioned this already, but I just want to make sure, I want you to highlight again about the things that we could do here in Davidson County. Like, what are where we are with our recycling program. We have aspirational goals of 60% recycling. That doesn't, we don't count C&D waste getting diverted to a C&D landfill. We just think that's bogus. We don't count incineration, because we have thought that was bogus. We don't have an incinerator now, thanks to many of the advocates in the room. And so here we are, and you mentioned pay-as-you-throw. We could tighten it up there. What are some other things that we could be doing?
Those are the big ones. Pay-as-you-throw on a more aggressive program, or a better way to put that, pay-as-you-throw on a smaller unit of measurement. You're collecting recycling once a month is unusual. Many programs are once a week. Several others, particularly with cart set-outs at 95-gallon carts, are looking at every other week. But I don't know of anybody else that's out there at monthly. You can never have too much outreach. And then I think you really start to address policy and say, this is what we're going to do in Davidson County or Nashville Metro, and make recycling mandatory. Just say, this is the expectation. It is unusual in this region, but it's not unusual in this country. Many in the Northeast and Midwest, you will not put your recycling out with your waste. You will participate. And in fact, if you don't have recycling on a consistent basis, you may not even get your waste picked up anymore.
Yeah, for those of you who were here last time, we heard about San Francisco, where at about 4 o'clock every morning, when you put your garbage out there, somebody who comes around and looks in your garbage can to see if you've recycled. So, we're not sure if that'd work here, but it might. We got a gun issue.
I don't know that it's going to happen. Yeah, I don't know if you can do that overnight, but I think you can set that as a plan of where you're going to go. To say that this is going to be our standard.
You're talking commercial as well as residential.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well,
you've got to address your commercial district.
So what happens? What happens in the state? Thank you, Will. What happens in at TDEC? Does the entire state have a mandatory recycling program as a government?
Not at this point. I know that TDEC, we do have a state employee recycling program that we try to push out to the rest of the state, and we do try to be a leader in the region. Our program's won, I think 9 times in an all-star award as far as local state governments in the recycling efforts. So I think Bobby's group back there actually picks it up and processes it for them. So we try to be a leader in that respect. As a statewide, though, as far as statewide mandatory recycling, I don't see that coming in the immediate future. I think that the plan can put that out there someplace to go. I think that ultimately the message of the economics ultimately will drive in that direction. Materials only come from two locations. It's extracted or it's recovered. And the cost of extraction is some cases hundreds of times more than it is to recover.
Sure.
And manufacturing is going to require it.
Sure. What about in Davidson County? Is there a mandatory program for all government offices to recycle?
The mayor issued I don't know exactly what to call it, but it wasn't a problem. He sent a letter to all employees insisting on 100% participation. It's not something that was like passed by council or anything like that, but there is a mandate that employees recycle, and for the most part, either Public Works or General Services is responsible for picking up that recycling, unless it's the school system, which they have their own separate.
So really, neither at the state or at the county level, there really is an institutionalized, a whole mechanism. There isn't a Kirby, right? I'm not trying to put anybody in the spot, but I'm thinking, here's a place that seems like it's pretty, a place that we ought to, if for nothing else, even if it's not much, it may be a lot, but it's just, the look of it would be better. Yeah, so, I'm not quite sure about this one, Larry, but there was a question. I know that the task force met. There was some conversations, some rules were proposed, and then they were taken off. So, is there any? Are those going to be revisited? Is that done? Kind of where it is. I know there was quite a bit of disappointment in various communities that they didn't move forward.
Well, the task force gave some very good recommendations. Basically, the recommendations that were given were, when put into the original rule package, was probably the greatest amount of change to the solid waste and recycling in the state of Tennessee in 20 years. And it, I think, shocked a lot of people that were invited to participate and may not have followed it as closely as what they thought. And then when the rule complexity was put into place, they had an uh-oh moment. And over the next 2 years after that first rule package went through, we did a lot of conversation with stakeholders back and forth. And ultimately, that particular rule package was voted down. We were asked by members of the board to revisit it after a year and break it up into smaller pieces that are more easy to digest, more easy to talk about, and do it kind of on a little bit slower pace. To date, we have put one package through, and it was pretty much housekeeping. Basically, it organized what was considered appropriate waste reduction strategies, and it also looked at the plan, solid waste planning, and addressed those two issues. It also further asked that a plan be created for those green box counties that were listed to go ahead and start looking at eliminating those green boxes and moving towards more of a convenience center type standpoint. We are preparing our second rule package. This rule package, as we talks about the qualitatively assessing the local governments that did not meet the goal. It talks about also in general enforcement and then basic reporting. The final piece that we'll revisit after we visited this particular piece and whatever comes from that will be a new goal. That piece in and of itself will probably take a great amount of time because there's a lot of stakeholders involved, a lot of interest. The goal will be to simplify the goal. The goal will be to get as much consensus as we can. And that one package, that's all we're going to address in that particular package, will be strictly the goal and nothing else. So that's how we're looking. During that time, the plan will come into play, hopefully, and give us some direction on how to consider a goal or the different pieces when we look at a goal.
A couple other questions, and then I'll ask you both to kind of tell us. I'm going to let you know now, just leave some parting words of wisdom about couple things we ought to be thinking about over the next year in Davidson County. And it has to be something new. Ken, I've already said it. But for both of you, when you're looking across either the state or the southeast, at our last conversation, we've had this conversation a lot with the board as well. There's recycling, and then there's a composting component as well. And it's not just about trees and limbs, but it's actually about our organics, our wet that comes out of our homes. Where does that seeing fitting in anywhere in the southeast? Who's doing a good job at it, if you know? And what are the costs of that? And has anybody transitioned from either a nothing or what we have to something different? What are your experiences? Have you seen that?
You could have Atlanta.
Sherman had it.
Sherman, he made it through here too, didn't he? Maybe he didn't have any matches. The Charlotte Airport is addressing all of their organic waste in a unique in vermiculture, which is using worms. That program is not quite a year old, and it's a little early to tell, but there's a lot of opportunity. North Carolina State University has been studying vermiculture for 25 years, has got a lot of information out. It functions well at the residential level very nicely, and there's a lot going on there. I think that Nashville Metro could look at home composting as for yard waste and some organics from the kitchen as an immediate step. I see large-scale organics recycling, both through composting and through some anaerobic digestion coming on, and these technologies are in place. The economics are making sense. In Columbia, South Carolina, there's an anaerobic digester that's running something like 25 tons a day of material. The Carolina Recycling Association held a whole 2-day, 3-day conference on organics November of last year. EPA Region 4 in Atlanta has got part of the material management team working forward to that. There are tremendous opportunities out there, and organics recycling or composting is simple. It's the way God's been managing waste for millions of years. It works very nicely. It works simply. We just need to work with it instead of against it. It is a part of the picture.
Were you going to talk Atlanta, or are you trying to
I'll
avoid
let
Atlanta
him
too?
cover that. Essentially, as a program, the fats, oils, and greases that they're looking at downtown Atlanta, working with the industry to try to manage that, and they do have a reporting tool that they're using just to try to see how good that is. Don't know a whole lot about what's going on there, but I was aware that through some other projects that I'm on that they were talking about that. One of the biggest problems with organics management is I guess when you have a facility, the neighbors don't tend to like it because of those anaerobic processes. It's very difficult to manage. I'm not a regulator when it comes to facilities. My area of expertise is working with local governments, not with solid waste facilities. So I'm going to defer any specific technical questions to them, but organics is a significant part by weight of what's in the waste stream. That means that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity to decrease what's going to a landfill and divert it somewhere else, and basically get a big bump on any kind of waste reduction goal that you have. There's challenges. The task force has identified, trying to separate out green leafy, like kind of vegetative material mixed in with like yard trimmings and essentially like a mulch compost, which try to maybe make that a potential pilot type project that is more cost effective for permitting than say a site that is using biosolids and mixing it in. So there's some costs there. Don't know how that would probably ultimately work out. That is one of the things that as we move through our rulemaking process after we establish a goal, that would be one of the strategies to hopefully meet the goal. But the key is that if there are those who want to do composting and can do composting, the science of trying to keep it from causing a problem needs to be followed closely so that it does not cause a problem. Because if all the neighbors don't like it, it's not going to be a very long-term, operation for that site. So you have to, as with any kind of solid waste facility, landfills or whatever, you got to be a good neighbor.
And if I could follow up too, Tennessee is home to what I have been told is the largest commercial scale composter in the country, and that's in Sevier County. If this board's not familiar with that, you really should take a look at the compost unit they've got there. I saw it 20 years ago. It's still operating. It's had some ups and downs. It's had some odor trouble, but they've addressed them. They're working, and I mean, they've got 20 years experience, and it's huge.
Well, I think I can say for the board that I don't think we're responsible for having to say yes or no to composting facilities. We don't have to vote on composting facilities. So, well, that kind of hit our major questions. The piece, I guess one final one is just the cost issue is $38 per ton for basically getting rid of it. What's the average cost on the different on a curbside or on a recycling center? Do you have any numbers on kind of what those average costs are across the state? I'll tell you, we learned from San Francisco that they basically, it's $120 a ton for everything, recycling, for the pick up the garbage, or for the composting. And I know we're paying a lot for Kirby, and we're paying less than $38 a ton, right, for our garbage.
I don't have current numbers, but I think it's right close to $40.
Okay, all right, thank you, 40.
Don't confuse collection with processing or disposal. They're different functions. And the tip fee is only disposal, not the collection end of it.
Okay. So what's that, and our 40 is just, is our tip fee, or is that the whole?
No, just disposal.
Got it. Do we have a handle on what our full costs are per ton for?
Sharon Molson put together some stuff for our last meeting. I'm trying to remember. I don't.
Well, what we'll do is at our next board meeting, we'll have that information, so we can kind of be comparing.
Just to touch on it real lightly, I don't have any specific numbers on that. But you remember the map where I had the 72 different baling facilities, material recovery facilities across the state? I have another map with 34 solid waste processing facilities or landfills across the state. You look where they're located, you look where the material recovery facilities are, the distance from the population centers where the materials are recovered to a MRF is much closer. And so the cost of transportation is going to be less. The problem is our infrastructure is geared towards disposal. So I'd like to think that, if you had 2 trucks a week that were going out, the cost for collection would almost be pretty much similar, except that the garbage is probably going to go a little bit further. Once you get to that facility, all those other economics start playing into play. So there's going to be a cost. You have employee costs, you have, but in the process of doing that, you're also creating, as opposed to a landfill that may create 1 job for every 10,000 people or 10,000 tons, a composting facility will create 4 jobs. A recycling operation can create between 22 and 95 jobs. So, yes, there's a cost. 95 people cost a lot, okay? But they also pay a lot, too, back into the system. So, I mean, the trouble is it's hard to do a straight apples and apples comparison because local governments do not use a full cost accounting enterprise type like a business would when it looks at the cost. Until we do that, it's just a guess.
Fair enough.
The waste collection truck and the recycling collection truck can be very similar. They can be the same truck or the same type of equipment. And their cost to run the same route is generally going to be about the same. If we're looking at per household collection, then the costs are going to be fairly equal. If our participation rate in recycling is low and that route cost is the same, then the per ton cost is going to be much higher. And we've got to address that participation rate. If we're picking up every fourth house, it's not going to be an economically attractive model. If we're picking up every house and we've got strong participation rate, I think at some point your waste collection would cost more than your recycling collection per ton. But you got to get that participation rate up. Everybody participates in garbage collection.
Yeah, that's for sure. So any parting words of wisdom from either of you?
I have a little bit, and it'll be different too.
All right.
One of the things from the task force that we had, there was one person from industry that was on there, and he gave something I thought was very sage to our group, to the little work group that we're in. Says, you've heard about the 3 R's. It's not reduce, reuse, recycle. It's resources, resolve, and real estate. And essentially, if any one of those 3 things are missing, that project's doomed to fail. If you don't have the resources, which is money and equipment, you're not going to be able to recycle. If you don't have resolve from the policymakers and the people that are there to accomplish it, no matter how much material you have to, and real estate you have to do it, it's not going to fail. It's not going to work. And if you don't have a place to put those carts or a place to take the materials afterwards, it's doomed to fail. It's kind of like fire. You have oxygen, heat, and fuel. If any one of them, the fire goes away, same thing happens with recycling. If any one of those 3 go away, so does your recycling.
Any words of wisdom?
Well,
Mr.
do you want to?
It kind of concerns me that we really haven't talked about the environmental price. What if we don't do this? What is the environmental price? And I haven't heard that mentioned so much. I'm kind of concerned about that.
Well, I saw that in the question. I wasn't quite sure if you've done any cost studies on that, but if you have any environmental cost studies on not recycling, and
I will put a little bit out there, but I don't have any data really to support that. Ultimately, when you have a landfill, which would be the entomb place for any kind of material, once that landfill closes, you have 30 years post-closure care that you have to look after that landfill. You have to monitor it. Any kind of problems that come from that landfill, you have to address, which means more monitoring. So when you get to the cost, those are just dollar costs that are involved. There's other costs that are involved in it. You know, if there is a problem, health and those kind of things. So, you know, I don't have dollar amounts on that because I don't deal with landfills, but you know, those are tangible costs. I mean, when you entomb something in the ground, you got to babysit it. And when you babysit it, there's going to be a cost to that.
and I understand what you're getting at. And it's these massive life cycle costs of all these different options. And from what I know, I don't think anybody's done a very good job of that. Whether you're talking about having to pick up here and take it down to Murfreesboro and all the air pollution it's getting there, or what's being dumped there, or picking up recycling every week and the air pollution that's caused by those extra trucks going to the Kirby's, all that stuff. There's lots of things to put in there. I don't know anybody who's ever done really good life cycle costs of a system of solid waste management.
There's talk from EPA that they were talking about some of that life cycle management and trying to get to that cost. It's a behemoth to try to get your hands around, and there's a lot of intangible variables, and it's just very difficult to put your hand around every single piece. Obviously, if you're taking up 130 acres of land for land disposal, there's other things that might be able to be used for that land, just in the cost for the, you know, be it parks or whatever green space. You have, you know, as you said, potential health costs that are there, neighborhood value around facilities. I mean, there's so many different things that could be explored. Of course, each case is a little bit different, but there's not been a study that I know of that really goes deep into that. A lot of that is, you know, it's just hard to grasp all the different variables that could go into that. I know that there's talk about it, but just how to quantify it and sit down and name all those variables is just kind of it'd just be very difficult to do, I think.
I think everybody in this room probably knows quite a few people. When I was younger, there's a lot of people, you didn't die until you were like, 60, 70, 80. And now, how many people do you know that have died in their 30s and their 40s? There's a reason for that. All the chemicals that are in the environment, and that's the cost I'm talking about. I'm not really talking about how much it costs.
I think those are great questions, and they're really of concern. I just don't think this panel is a place to be able to answer those questions. But you're right. I mean, those are huge, and people have done it in lots of different ways with individual products. An aluminum can, you have to dig up the bauxite somewhere. It has to be transported. It has to be refined. It has to be used. Processing, people get hurt, there's damage there, people get hurt when it goes to the actual manufacturer, there's pollution there, there's pollution in the river, then that's just one can, right? So doing the whole thing is huge. But Will, is there any final comments from you, or do you want to run back?
Well, I would
settle
support
in?
this kind lady, and I can't give you the full life cycle analysis, but it seems to me when we take the atoms that are in any material that we've got and we figure out a way that we can continue to use it repeatedly, there's got to be a better bottom line in that in the long run. My parting words would be, this is a happening city. My daughter moved here in 2007. I enjoy coming here to see her, but also this city's vibrant, it's growing. You are the state capital. You're the leader in the state. I challenge this board to take that leadership role and move this program forward so that the rest of the state can use that as a model. And CERTIC would then like to take that to the neighboring 8 states in this region and take good management practices, because we need the material. Manufacturing needs this material. When we started recycling programs 20, 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have markets for the material. We had to push. We gave stuff away. We paid people to take things. We've got, and we, as in the characterization here and across this region, the demand exists for the material. If you can get it collected, those trucks have a place to go for that material now. And there are jobs out there. This will work, but we've got to have the behavior change, and we've got to bump Tennessee off of this very, very low capture rate that we've got in this state. And I think you're the group that needs to take the leadership role.
Fantastic. Larry, Will, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, everybody. The board will be meeting sometime in the next month. I think we have to figure out a date. So we'll be putting that out in the next 1 to 6 weeks.